Hey, I'm going to give you a little bit on the paper today. If you see me looking over, I'm looking at the study Bible for the class. I'm looking initially at the introduction here, which is on page 247, Hebrew Bible. Bernard Levinson wrote this section and the notes on Deuteronomy. Very good stuff. When you're doing your outline, you may want to look at the kind of the macro structure and contents on page 249. Gives you an idea where the passage falls. In fact, Levinson labels this section the legal corpus, Deuteronomy's transformation of Israelite religion. If you flip on over to chapter 23, starting with verse 9, it's on page 288 of the Hebrew Bible section of the New Oxford Annotated Study Bible for the class. The notes at the bottom are stupendous. In fact, when you're doing your outline for the class, what you may want to do is use kind of some of those headings there. Like, for example, sections 9 through 14 are labeled special rules for a military camp. Now, so you may differ from that. Some sources actually differ than that too, so that's fine. Just use something sort of like this. What you're looking for when you do the outline, the body of it, the outline and the breakdown of the paper initially is going to be seeing how these verses group together thematically, and it'll help you in some ways interpret what they may mean overall. So use that. Now, as far as the actual outline or the paper itself, let's start there on page 12 of the syllabus, which I've got it here on the screen. I'm looking at. You guys will have to look at it on your own there. I want you guys to read through the passage. Read through it several times. In fact, I provided at least 4 translations. You can use more than that or different ones if you want to, but I provided 4 on the website. Read through those. Note any translational differences. That may help you understand the meaning of some of the words. Like, for example, we've talked about already in the class the discussion board, and also a hint on the first exam. Maybe on the final, who knows? The issue of the dog in church in Deuteronomy 23:18. Several translations have that as male prostitute. King James has dog. There's some interpretive issues there. So these translation comparisons will help you. Look at least 4. Again, I've provided some. You can look at more if you want to. Keep notes. Read through the passage. If there's something you don't understand or something you may wonder, like, what is this? Make a note of it. Like, for example, holiness, holy, or consecrated. Those words appear in this passage. What does that mean? If you come from a Christian background, you may think you know what it means, but you may not. I've come to realize as serving a church and being a Christian for, most of my life, we don't always know what these words mean. We use these loaded words and we have to look them up. And I provided some articles, Bible Dictionary articles and commentaries on the website to help you guys with that. But you'll have to do the legwork. Okay? So once you look at the translations, take a few notes based on translations alone, then look at the footnotes. Those footnotes will help you as far as fleshing out some of the main terms here. Like, for example, we'll find verses 17 through 18, there's a mention of Kedeshah. One verse in verse 17, it's used to talk about a temple prostitute, or what the Levinson talks about. The next verse, a different word, verse 18, the word zanah, Hebrew word zanah, actual prostitute is used. They're interchangeable in some passages. Levinson makes a note of that. So that's something you may want to, it's good, perfect for the body. It'd be good for the body of the paper, something to take note of. Once you look at the footnotes and everything, see if there's any like these footnotes, like an A, B. Like, for example, the only one I see in your passage is the footnote A, Hebrew, A dog, and that's for the male prostitute, the Kalev in verse 18. Take notes of those. Notice some of the grammatical structures of the passage. Are there any shifts in person, shifts in voice, but, also, thus, when, shifts like that? Note those. That'll help you as far as organizing the paper and as well as the thought structure and flow of the paper. Those are more in play in narrative type passages, these structures as like but, also, then, shift in speaker, location. This passage, not so much. It's legal corpus. It's a little different, but do take note of that. Note these loaded words, these words used by the author. Like I mentioned earlier, like holiness. Look those up in Bible dictionaries. Look that up in the commentaries. Look up the information if you don't understand what the camp is. What setting is this in? One of the things you'll find, and Levinson mentions this, is some of the, for example, the taking of a slave in the passage. That goes in contrast to the some things going on in the ancient Near East, in the Hammurabi Code, Neo-Assyrian relations, things like that. You may not know that just looking at the passage. You may, like most of us would, think about slavery in the U.S. Prior to 1860s. But slavery in the ancient world was a little bit different. And I've provided some articles on the website to help you with that. Look into that stuff. Look into these loaded terms, these loaded words. Think about that original audience. For them, they may, especially those around the time of Josiah when Deuteronomy was probably found in the temple, they would have been influenced by the Neo-Assyrian laws, and they probably would have known, or at least heard of, at least some of these learned people, like the scribe Shaphan, would have known about the Code of Hammurabi, one of the first legal codes in the world. That may give us a bit of light on understanding this passage and how it is, or how this passage is counter-cultural in light of these other issues. Look in the Coogan text. Coogan may have a few things in there. Chase down some of these things in the Bible dictionaries, concordances, atlases. You're required to at least use one Bible dictionary. So of all those articles I gave you, at least one. Now, as far as the commentaries go, look at a one-volume Bible commentary. That's a good. Those volumes, one-volume commentaries, offer a good macro structure of the paper. They don't give you all the bits and pieces like a Zanah or Kedashah or the male prostitute thing, female prostitute thing, but they're going to give you the overall structure in some ways. Those are very helpful. Help you understand the gist of this part of Deuteronomy and how this fits into pieces. In fact, if you'll notice in the introduction and the outline, I've asked you guys to think about the notion of literary genre, literary context. This literary context in some ways is how does this passage fit in like a puzzle piece to the greater notion of what's going on in the chapters around it and to the book of Deuteronomy as a whole. Okay? You're also required, besides one Bible dictionary and one single volume commentary, to use 3 multi-volume commentaries or full-scale commentaries, and I've included some of those in the files. These get some of the nuts and the bolts, the details, the fine details. And these will help you flesh out some of those key terms you hadn't found them elsewhere. It may even raise some issues that you haven't even noted. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. These people have advanced degrees and probably could, run circles around everybody as far as their knowledge of the ancient Near East and their languages knowledge. Try to write in your own words what this passage is. Paraphrase it. And maybe even answer the question: what's this passage about? What does it say? You'll notice this passage is a little hodgepodge. It may seem that way. But I think there's an overall notion here of holiness that you guys may want to tap into. And, of course, holiness is the idea of being set apart, which hopefully you'll find that in the sources, right? If not, well, you have a little bit of insight now, right? In your own words, write up your findings. I would take notes along the process all the way. Maybe keep a notebook or maybe like a Google document or something like a Google Drive document, something to keep your notes together. Type up your paper, 6 to 8 pages, no longer than 8. I generally stop about after page 8. Okay, that's not counting the title page and bibliography. Use footnotes. It's easier for me to track down the sources when you use the footnotes, and you just go into Word and you can put in. There's a reference tab on most of the newer versions of Word, and you can put an insert footnote. They should be sequentially numbered. Like you shouldn't have a footnote number 1 on each page. That doesn't work that way. One advantage for you guys for using the footnotes is that, well, it takes up more space on the page. Okay, better for you guys. Notice there's sample papers on the website. They're on different passages than what you're writing on, but give you an idea of what I'm looking for. We're looking for a verse-by-verse study or section-by-section study of this passage's pericope that you've been given, Deuteronomy 23:9 through 25. And it's looking at this passage in light of the ancient literary culture, context, etc. Once you finish all this, there's an optional rough draft, that you can turn in to me. The date's on the syllabus, and then you can turn in the final draft course letter, which is due, and that's 15% of your grade. Okay. After the rough draft, make revisions. I strongly do that. If you do a rough draft, you don't have to. I strongly encourage you to, though. I take note of it, and I sometimes give people a little more grace. After the step-by-step guide on the syllabus, page 12 and part 13. Page 13 has some approved resources. I've given you guys almost everything you'd need on the website, but if you want to use something else, there's a list here. You can go to the library. I would recommend going to a college library. Public libraries don't always have these. You may find the Broadman Bible Commentary in some of the libraries, maybe, who knows. But a lot of these resources I've already given to you, so you may not have them. Now, if you don't see something on this list, ask me. And if I think it's something that's a critical or scholarly work, then I'll let you use it. See, there's a difference between these sources. Some sources are more of a devotional, how does this passage make me feel? And a lot of these resources that I'm recommending to you guys are scholars who've done the legwork, who know the ancient culture, the history, the language, and they write about this passage in light of the text. And it may be something more of a pulpit type commentary, more of a Sunday school type commentary, but at least these commentaries have done the legwork. And there's some that are a little too technical for you, I understand that, but you can kind of get nuggets here and there if you want to. And as far as the outline goes, you have the historical context, who's the author? Is there one author? If you argue for Mosaic authorship of the passage, Deuteronomy 23, 9 through 25, back that up with sources. Also offer alternative views. You may not agree with it, but at least note there's something else out there, like a documentary hypothesis, okay? As far as location and or socio-ethnic composition of the original or intended audience, remember the ancient people read this before you read it. To what audience, to what audience may have this been written? One verifiable, or one almost verifiable, scholars debate this, one place this may have been read was when Shaphan and these people rebuilding or renovating the temple found the Deuteronomy scroll, during the reign of Josiah. How may this have applied to them? How may this text have applied to the supposed audience of the text, the people of Israel in the wilderness? How may it have applied to them? Think about things like that. I mean, if you think about the notion that this was at least read by people during the reign of Josiah, or at least heard by people during the reign of Josiah, then the Code of Hammurabi, Neo-Assyrian rules and regulations also are echoes or sounding boards which may relate to this passage, something to think about. Date of composition, we really don't know, but you guys can look at the scholars and see what they may think about this. Some may say pre-exilic, exilic, maybe even before that, or at least the writing down portion. Of course, a lot of these notions in this passage may go back all the way to the time of Moses, a verbal rule that's been passed down through scribes and learned people. Now, as far as literary context, the genre, the commentator is probably the place to go for this. This is a legal code, but they can tell you a little bit more about this. Now, Deuteronomy is kind of a hodgepodge of things. It has some narrative sections, some poetry, some legal codes, but the commentators will help you with that, okay? Think of genre like you would maybe music or movies. Some people like horror movies or comedies, or some people like rap, rock, country. And you don't always approach those movies or music the same way. I wouldn't approach a satire or parody or mockumentary the same way I would a documentary. I wouldn't think This Is Spinal Tap, which is a mockumentary, was an actual documentary. If it was, I'd probably have no faith in humanity. But if you ever seen the movie, you'd understand. Think about things like that. Genre may affect how one interprets the passage. As far as context within the book, look at the larger setting of Deuteronomy. What all is going on in Deuteronomy, and as far as your passage goes, how does it relate to some of the chapters around it, some of the verses around it, the puzzle pieces? And again, some of the commentaries up this. The one-volume commentary would be great on this. The study Bible. Levinson's outline at the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy section is wonderful to help you kind of get some of this notion of what's going on. Okay. As far as the body goes, you want to divide this up into different verses. Now look at the sample paper for this one. Okay. How do these verses break down? How do they fit together as coherent pieces? And one of the things you're going to do when you do the actual paper, the outline, I'm not too big of a stickler on getting all the nuts and bolts here, but when you get to the actual paper, you're going to work through some of these key loaded terms, some of these words, some of these verses, and explain what it may have meant. What are some of the things going on with the cultic prostitution in verse 18, especially 17, 18? Some cultures, Canaanites, may have had cultic prostitution. The Greeks may have had cultic prostitution. Where in some places, some cultures, they may have worshipped the gods through intercourse, and that the climax of intercourse was the ultimate worship of the god. Things like this may come into play. So you're going to talk about that and talk about how this may relate to modern life. Now, going outside the camp and digging a hole to put into your number 2 may not be applicable to you today, but that notion of holiness and separateness may be important. So something to think about. Now, as far as conclusion goes, I want you to summarize your findings. Summarize what this passage is maybe some import for modern day life. This conclusion section is kind of a jumping off board. If you were to try to teach a Bible study in a church or a sermon, this is a jumping off point into that. Or maybe if you're just trying to tell somebody about this passage in a nutshell, this conclusion is a good place to do that. And kind of talk about what you've learned. Maybe the little process of doing the paper, maybe a few sentences or two might help there. And as far as the grading rubric, I've pretty much got everything I've got on the outline on there. I want you to engage some of the key issues. I want you to wrestle with loaded terms. I do great for that. And notice that the body has most of the weight there, 45 points. So don't spend all your time on the introduction. Introduction should be no more than 2 pages. Okay, the body is the bulk of it. And learn, if you write well, you're going to summarize well. And another thing is, when you write the paper, don't quote use a quote from a paper every other line. A good writer can paraphrase. And if you use an idea from a source, if it's beyond common knowledge, if you quote something from a source beyond common knowledge, you need to cite it. Use a citation. If you don't, that's plagiarism. Okay, and then that can result in the failure of a paper, and eventually it might can even result, if you do it enough times, in the failure of a class. Give credit where credit's due. Okay, it's stealing if you don't. I mean, if you use Levinson's idea from his introduction and it's not common knowledge, give him credit for it. He deserves it, right? And also notice on the rubric, I have writing style. I don't put a lot of emphasis on grammar, but if you write like you text, or somebody may text, I'm definitely going to mark you off from that. I understand a few spelling errors here, a few grammatical errors, but you're in college. Try to write like you write, like you're supposed to. Okay. 16 points, your final grade of your paper is the outline and bibliography. Okay, so you need to do that and get that turned in. I do not accept late submissions. Okay. The template, you got a template on the website, and follow the template on bibliography. I'm not a huge stickler on the citations, Trabian or SBL. If you have questions, ask me. But essentially, you cite the author of the source. Like, for example, if you look at the study Bible, the new Oxford Annotated Study Bible, the introduction and the footnotes are written by Bernard Levinson. So if you're citing the footnotes or the introduction, not the biblical text, but the footnotes or the introduction to Deuteronomy, you would cite Levinson, and then quotation marks, Deuteronomy. And say in New Oxford Annotated Study Bible, the places published, New York, publisher, Oxford Press, and then the date of publication, page number, etc., and the footnotes. Now, in the bibliography, you would include footnotes, of course. I want the main stuff. I'm not going to be a huge stickler on that. It's only 5 points of the grade, okay? But I want you to try to think about that. If you have any questions, email me, call me. We can even do Skype if need be. Philip.scott.henson is my Skype. I can be on if you need me to. I'm not always on. But if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.